it is time. One of my favorite parts of the year, the PSL Power Rankings going into season 6. It's crazy. This league has been around for like a year now. But okay, so before I get into these rankings, these are the odds put out by the man in Las Vegas who makes the sports betting odds of who is most likely to win the championship. And I have all the notes here, and I'm going to go over the rankings and explain them all to you. So, before we get started, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be disappointed in their rankings, I think. I think a lot of people are going to feel like they're a little too low. And I think the reason for that is you all saw Donkey's rankings. They were really good. He did a really good job of that. But there was a big difference between mine and his. In his, he had, I think, 4 S tier teams, maybe like 7 or 8 A tier teams, bunch of B, bunch of C, all that stuff. I have one S tier team. I have one A tier team. Okay, so this team up here at number 1 is in a tier of their own. Tier 2 is in a tier of their own. Number 3 to 6, number 3 to, I'm not sure, maybe 3 to 5, 3 to 4, I can't remember exactly. Also, maybe not in a tier of their own, but very highly ranked in that tier. And the difference between number 6 and number 28, okay? The difference between number 6 and 28 is smaller than the difference between number 6 and number 2. Just think about that for a second. The difference between number 6 and 28, the gap is smaller than the difference between number 6 and number 2. So I genuinely believe this more than any other season, that any team can win this season. I think any team can win this season. I think all the teams are so similarly ranked, and the only thing differentiating them in these rankings is coaching skill and past coaching performance, really. There's a few differences, a few tier gaps, but they're small, and it's very hard to rank these teams. So I really heavily had to lean on coaching skill. So there are a few teams though that I think are quite rough, but they have a good coach, and vice versa. So to start off these rankings, in at number 32, the 32 ranked team, the team that Las Vegas has as the least likely to win the championship, is New Orleans. Brand new coach, and there's a lot of questions about this guy's coaching methods. A lot of questionable things have been brought up. A lot of rumors, things that I've gotten a few words from other coaches, especially his assistant coach, questioning his methods and wants him to be investigated for a few things. So that's going to be coming up very shortly. You'll see that in league news. But this one's going to be 32. This team I actually think is fucking amazing for the fact they picked like Magikarp, Bidoof, and kind of meme picked every pick they had in the draft. Is somehow like really good still. It's just the coach I don't think is going to be taking this seriously at all. And based off his meme draft, is probably going to meme in every game. And I love it. I love that. It's fun. This is kind of, that's what I like. You know, this league is just for fun. Even though it's getting very competitive now. But that's kind of the main point I want to get across. But overall, one of my personal favorite teams, New Orleans. I do love this team. Any team that has Magikarp and Bidoof on it, to me, will always be one of my favorites. And we'll see. There's a trend where the 32 ranked team seems to go 5-0. So we'll see how that goes. Number 31, we have Detroit. Detroit, overall, I don't think this team is that bad. I think Gouging Fire is really nice for this team. It's just that we have to see. We have to see them actually put stuff together. Love Hayden, one of my favorite people in the league. I really hope he does well this season, but he's got to show that he can put it together. 30 is Pittsburgh. Now Pittsburgh, this is the interesting thing about Pittsburgh. They went 5-0 last season with a rough team. So Ninja has proven over and over and over again that he is like a legit coach in this league. But the thing is, I really don't like this team. It's really hard to rank this guy because he drafts teams that I just don't like at all. But he does like way better than expected. So I don't really know how to rank this team. He just always outperforms his ranking, but it's really hard. Overall, I had this team actually the worst ranked team. I actually had this team the worst ranked team. Somehow worse ranked than the Bidoof for Magic Card team, but I'm sure he'll do well. But the thing is, he finished 5-0 last season, and his schedule this season is brutal. It is absolutely brutal. Every game, every opponent he has is just like, yeah, fuck, good luck. His schedule's insane. 29 is Tennessee. So this team here, I don't mind this team. I think this is where there's a break where the teams from this point on aren't actually that bad. So the problem I had with this team, and hopefully I can find my notes without ruining the recording. So the thing with this team is they have a lot of double up in typing. And a lot of roles that kind of are already occupied by another Pokemon. So they have Infernape, who I really like, but they also have Ceruledge. I don't think these two necessarily work that well together. They have Rotom Wash and Bellibolt that I don't necessarily think work that well together. I know one's weak to ground, the other one has Levitate, so it's immune. They are very similar, but it's not the worst. It's not the worst thing in the world. But when you pair that with then Tapu Fini, it's like, okay, he has Bellibolt, he has Tapu Fini, and then Rotom Wash. It's like, okay, it's fine. You can all kind of work around it a little bit, but if Rotom Wash instead was something else that wasn't an electric or a water type, I think it would be a lot better for the team. But outside of that, there is Mudsdale and technically Wobbuffet to help out defensively. I just think there's a lot of Pokemon on this team that could be swapped for something else and would greatly improve it. There's not a lot of hazards. The Defog I think is fine. Speed I think is fine. Overall, this is not a bad team. It's not that bad at all. It's just also the coach has got to prove that he can step up. He got the defensive MVP and the low tier MVP with Bellibolt this season. We know Bellibolt can step up. I think it's really going to come down to, honestly, I think Infernape and Ceruledge both have to stand out individually and not kind of feed off each other and take each other's like spots on the teams. If they can exist as like individual Pokemon and both pop off, that's the vision. That's the way I can see this team kind of winning. And the same with Rotom. Rotom also has to do its job defensively while also existing with Tapu Fini and Bellibolt, and while they also do their job. It's kind of like, can they all exist together? I don't know. Next is Chicago. So Chicago, it's really hard to remember all the notes I had for all these teams because I didn't actually write anything down except for my overall like score for the team. So I don't remember much of this team. Okay, let me get it up. Okay, this team is the defensive core I actually kind of liked when I first saw the team. I was like Slowbro, Togetic. I think these are pretty good together. There is an electric weakness, so hopefully it patches that up. And as I'm going through the team, there isn't really anything that patches it up well. So that's rough. I think the defensive core is incomplete. I actually like Togetic a lot. I think it's actually slept on a little bit. I think it's a really good Pokemon for the points it's worth. And then there's Melmetal. So Melmetal on this team is probably going to be left to like pick up a lot of defensive slack as well as Torkoal, but the thing is they don't get a lot of, or they don't get recovery at all. And because of the low HP on Togetic, it's going to be hard to kind of heal them up consistently, especially with Melmetal, because it's like 55 HP trying to heal 135. It's going to be tough to keep Melmetal alive. So defensively, I don't think the defensive core is complete, and offensively, I don't hate the team at all. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Klefki. Klefki has to do very well of just like annoying the other team. A lot of thunder waves, a lot of good chip on the toxic spikes to really open things up for like Ogre and stuff. But there's just a lot of pressure on the defensive duo of Slowbro and Togetic to kind of hold it all together, while both being weak to electric is kind of rough. But we'll see. The coach is improving, just like his friend, just the way they're both on the trend upwards in their like coaching skills. So they're getting better each season. So hopefully he pops off, because he's a cool dude. 27 is Danwell. So this is a team that I really fucking like. I really like this team. But I like it. it's not great overall. But it's probably my favorite team. If I had to pick a team that's my favorite, it's this one. So the problem I have with this team is there's no defense on this team. There's a lot of bulky things. You got your Lapras, your Gigalith, Alolan and Muck, but these are all like 4th string defensive options. And what I mean by that is like, you want to have your big defensive core, your big trio. So like your defensive Pokemon number 1, 2, and 3, they're your big 3. And then your 4th, they're really good to have as like, they can sub in for a matchup where one of the Pokemon in the big 3, it's not it for that matchup this week. Pokemon like Muck, Lapras, and Gigalith, they're really good for that. But the reason I think they're like 4th tier like defensive options, because they don't really get recovery. They kind of just get chipped down very easily. And then it's kind of like up to Gardevoir to kind of like heal them with Wish, which you probably don't really want to do with Gardevoir that much. So it's going to be tough. I do think the defense is going to be it's going to be hard to stay alive. And then the offense on this team, I don't really love all that much either. Competitively, like individual as Pokemon, one of my favorite teams. Crobat really fast, really good, but isn't the best win condition. However, there is one Pokemon on this team that can carry it. He made a trade in the draft for Lucario. Looking at this team, Lucario needs to carry the fuck out of this team. The defense isn't going to matter. The offense isn't going to matter. If Lucario can pop the fuck off, and Lucario can do that, but Lucario is the one Pokemon on this team to me that stands out, that can absolutely dominate for this team. And if this team does well, if this team wins the championship, it is because Lucario wins the MVP. Lucario is the key to carrying this team. Because if we look at it, there is no real win condition in any of the other Pokemon besides Lucario. Lucario is probably the win condition in every game. That's a lot of pressure to put on a Pokemon. But Lucario can do it. Lucario can do it. So it's all going to be up to zone, and if Lucario can pop off. And I hope it does. We're already 13 minutes in, so I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit. So, Rampardos. This is Lonmon's best team. Lonmon, you're listening right now, you have to pop off with this team. This is the best team you've ever had by far. I think this team is arguably a top 10 team, maybe even top 8. You just have to prove that you can do it as a coach. That's why you're ranked 26, because I think you made playoff one time, and it was because of like a weird thing where I accidentally got the differential wrong, and someone else forfeited their place to you in playoffs once they figured it out, because they felt bad taking it off you. I don't think I ever told you that, but there you go. So yeah, you gotta show me. This is your team, okay? This is your team. You made some trades in the off season that I made for you. The team is insane. It's really fucking good. You can pop off. You can win with this team. You just gotta show me. Baltimore. Okay. So another thing to note is that coach skill is weighted very heavily. A lot of the new coaches, I don't know how good you are, so you're going to be ranked a little lower than maybe your team is compared to others, because you just got to prove yourself. So Baltimore, the thing with this team, I remember it. Mew, in my opinion, is the best Pokemon in draft. However, Mew on this team I think is really bad, because Mew is very pigeonholed into just being defensive on this team, and it's gonna have to carry this team defensively. It has things like Ting Lu, but it has no recovery. Mew is kind of locked into roles, and that is not good for Mew. When Mew is locked into roles, it's not that good because Mew is not great. Actually, it is great at everything, but it's not top tier. It's not S tier at everything. It's just good at everything. But when you're locking it into like a few roles, okay, it's like a good defensive Pokemon, but like you're paying 18 for like a good defensive Pokemon, which is like, what's the best defensive Pokemon on average? They're ranked like 13-ish, tier 13. So to maximize Mew, you have to be able to use all its roles, and to do that, you have to draft a team that does everything, and then Mew can just come in, doesn't have to do anything, it can just do whatever it wants. In this team, it has to be defensive, so that was my big flaw with this team. Next is Cincinnati. So this team, if I remember correctly, this team, the first like few Pokemon on this team were absolutely insane, like really, really good. Yes, this is the team I'm thinking of. So that Urshifu, Katana, Skeledirge, Mamoswine, Terrakion, and Chansey. So I'm looking at this team and I'm like, okay, this team is really fucking good so far. If they can just add some more defensive Pokemon, get this defensive core fixed and just nailed, and this is going to be probably maybe even the best team in the league, because this offense is scary. Then I go to the next Pokestone, Galvantula. Like, actually Galvantula is pretty good. Webs on this team is fucking insane. And then we have the Fire Tauros, Farafrig, Huntail, and then Growlithe. And this is like, your only defensive Pokemon is kind of Chansey, and I guess Skeledirge is probably going to be locked into defensive roles in this draft. I feel like if to make this team better, I would trade Katana. I don't think you need Katana. You already have Terrakion, Mamoswine, and Urshifu. You could even trade Terrakion, but I actually really like Terrakion. It's one of my favorite Pokemon in draft. I would trade Katana and try to get like a defensive, really good defensive steel type. If you can do that, you got the wish from Chansey. Just see if you can make that happen, because if you get a good defensive core with this offense with webs, you're gonna do like really fucking good with this team. But it's overall still very improved from last season. The next group is Kansas, New England, and New York Aqua Jets. So Kansas City, when I looked at this team, I was like, fuck yes, this is like the best team Kansas has ever had. Like, they always draft teams that I love, but then the more I looked into it, the more I was like, maybe there's like a few holes in here. But it looks very good on paper. This is one of the first teams I did. So the defense was the thing that stood out to me. There isn't really the best defensive core. So you got Empoleon, who I really like, Piloswine, and then Goodra. That's decent. Like, Goodra's really good, especially defensive. Piloswine was a defensive MVP candidate last season, and Empoleon is obviously really good. You have Volcanion there, who can be very defensive as well. So overall, like, the defense is there. The defense is there, the offense is there, the speed is there. But it's the ground, the ground weakness, and the flying weakness as well. There's, if I remember correctly, there was the fighting weakness, yeah. So there's these big three weaknesses on this team, and it's going to be quite difficult for Fairy as well. Both your Fairy resistances are weak to ground, which not many Fairies are on ground, so I think overall it's probably going to be fine, unless you get like up against the Enamorus. It's probably going to like tear a hole in your team. But overall, I do think this might actually be one of your better teams. The speed's really nice. I do like it. I really hope Kansas City does well. So New England was a team that, in my opinion, maybe the best offensive team in the league, maybe the best offensive team, but there is no defense, like almost at all. Um, Let me just grab the team real quick, because I'm pretty sure there was no defense on this team whatsoever. Just give me a second. Okay, this is what it was. So there's no real defensive core. This is very similar to Denver's team. There's a lot of like fourth string defensive Pokemon. So stuff like Aggron, Celesteela, Nidoqueen. These are all like very good like fourth options because they don't get recovery. They're just kind of there. They can soak hits, but they have no longevity. Same with Zygarde. So this team can still do well because the offense is incredible. The offense is so good. I think Aggron is maybe the best low tier Terra Pokemon. That's my, like, we're talking like tier 3 below. I think Aggron's probably number 1. I think Aggron is so good. But yeah, I love Alakazam, I love Aerodactyl, I love Zygarde, I love Celesteela, I love Blaziken. So many good offensive win conditions on this team. The coach started very well when she took over the team, did fall off at the end, but that's fine and expected because you're taking over a team that you didn't even draft. So I really hope this coach does well. But I think the lack of defense might come back to her in the end. And with the Aqua Jets, the New York Aqua Jets, just let me get their team up. Okay, this team I actually quite like. So this is where there's a jump in the next tier of teams. Team is starting to get a little more complete now. I think Victini and Zuma are really good together. Like they will just punch holes and just wreck teams. But I do think this team lacks in win conditions. You have the belly drum Azumarill. I think Crocodile is like, Crocodile's a good win condition, but it's very hard to use as a win condition. And then Stack Attack is really good on the Trick Room and stuff. But there's a lot of pressure on the defense because you have Hydra Apple, who doesn't have the best defensive typing, but is really good with, like, it's bulky as fuck with the Generator. And then you have a bunch of other things that are good defensively but can't heal. So there's a lot of pressure on Ordino to probably going to be used as your Terra Pokemon almost every game because this thing has to kind of pop off and has to utilize its Terra typing to kind of get a good matchup and keep everything alive. So Ordino is going to be like the key to this team doing well, I think. Next is Minnesota, New York Gigantamax, and Buffalo. So Minnesota, I actually really like their top Pokemon, like their Dragonites, the Manaphy, Aegislash. This team's going to be really strong. Has a lot of really good win conditions. I just do think the other Pokemon, they're going to have to really step up and support these Pokemon as best they can so they can pop off. But if they do, if Aegislash, Dragonite, and Manaphy pop off, this team can win a championship. So I think these 3 Pokemon are like insane. New York. So let's just start with Buffalo because I don't have to find their team. Buffalo is, I really like this team. One of my favorite teams in the league. It's so defensive. But there was a big problem with these last few defensive teams. Like he had so many bulky, just like hard to break Pokemon. But then overall his defense still wasn't that good. It was like a weird kind of synergy between them all where they all had very similar weaknesses. This time though, I think this team's going to be so fucking hard to beat, man. This team's going to be so difficult to beat. Just fat Pokemon everywhere. But then they also have like good speed and their hazards are good. Their removal is kind of like their weakest point. And also win conditions might struggle a little bit. You have Deoxys defense, Hisui and Gudra. Maybe Hatterene with Trick Room, but yeah, the win conditions are where this is the weakest point in this team. As good as like these bulky teams are, it's just like withstanding everything. Them having consistent win conditions is where they kind of fall apart. So I think Gudra and Deoxys defense, they're going to be the key to victory this team. So, New York. So the thing I really liked about the New York Gigantamax was their defense. I really like the defense on this team. The defense is really good. Florges, Clodsire, Skarmory, Knuckle Stack. Probably the best defensive core in the league that we've gone over so far besides Buffalo. But the problem this one was the offense. So you have a lot of really fast Pokemon like Sceptile and Jolteon. They're very hard to use though, because they don't hit very hard and they're frail. So they're more just very good revenge killers. Jolteon getting Calm Mind though is nice. And then Sceptile can also do some like sneaky things. They're just very hard to get consistent, like effective use out of. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Laddie and Munkidori. I think these two Pokemon have to pop off. Them kind of getting stopped by steals for the most part. Laddie can kind of work around it with coverage, but these two Pokemon have to pop off. And I think they will. But you need a third offensive option to really kind of go in, and I think that has to be Scyther. So I think if you can utilize Scyther well, get some good get Scyther to kind of pop off, get some kills with like some cool ass Swords Dance sets and shit. If Scyther can hold his own, then I think this team will do well as like the third offensive option. So this is where a tier gap was. I think the teams from here on are just a slightly bit better. And pretty much from here to maybe like rank 9, I think. This is where a lot of coaching comes into play. I think there are one or two teams here that I don't think are as good as the rest of the teams in this group, but they are here because the coach is really good. 17. Let's just reveal them all because we gotta speed this up a little bit. We'll stop it here. So Dallas, I think this team's pretty solid. It's pretty solid. New coach though, so I don't know how good this coach is, but everyone loves Ducky, and from what I've heard, he's pretty good. But he's just got to prove it to me. The offensive trio with Enamorus, Haxorus, Glaceon is like fucking insane. It's so fucking good. One of my favorite offensive trios in the league. It's fast. It's not that fragile. Glaceon is a little bit, but the other two can they can hold their own. I really like this team, or this offensive trio. The thing with this team though is the defense. So we have Seismitoad, Bronzong, Quillfish. That's the defensive trio. In Donkey's notes, he said that was a pretty big weakness to, I think, Fairy and Flying, but he said Bronzong should be able to cover that up nicely. I don't really think so. Mostly because I've never been a fan of Bronzong because it just gets chipped down too easy. Doesn't get really any recovery. And when you pair that with Seismitoad and Quillfish, you also don't get recovery. Could be wrong, maybe still when Quillfish gets Pain Split, but I don't think it does. But if it does, that will help a lot. But you're still left with the fact that Seismitoad and Bronzong are just going to get chipped down very easily. There's not a lot of other defensive options, no Wish to kind of heal them up. I thought Whimsicott got Wish, but I was wrong. Greninja also is a very good addition to the offensive core, and I think Hariyama is really good as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how this team goes, but I think I think the key to victory is the big trio, Glaceon, Haxorus, and Nemesis. They have to kind of just win the games before their defense gets chipped down. Green Bay. So Green Bay and Arizona, let's just pair these two together because I have very similar feelings about them. The teams I don't really like. I think the teams got downgraded from last season, but they're here instead of being in the 20s because I think the coaching is good. So Arizona was one of my favorite teams last season. from like a personal thing, maybe not competitively, but I think competitively they're very similar, almost exactly the same, but maybe slightly worse. Just straight offense, not much defense. If I'm correct, I think this is the team that has Miltank on it, and it is the only defensive Pokemon. But the offense lost things like Manaphy and Scyther, who I think was actually really good with the Terra rule promotion thing that it had. So I think this team's offense got downgraded a little bit. However, I think it is overall a little bit faster, which might come into play a lot in a good way for him. So Adam is a very, very good coach. When it comes to winning the championship, I think this team is going to, again, like I said last season, it's going to stomp all the teams ranked below it. So its overall ranking in the standings is probably going to be pretty good. But then it just has to go the distance in the playoffs, which is going to be tough because I think good teams can exploit this. Green Bay, I think this team is overall a little bit worse. Gliscor is amazing, but there's nothing there to really help it. You have Dusknoir, who, the more I look at it, the more I think it's like a pretty good pairing, because as long as you proc the Toxic Orb thing, it soaks knockoffs, and Dusknoir will get absolutely railed by any knockoff. So being able to switch into them freely, because you don't care about the loss of item, because once you're toxic, you're toxic. That's a really good kind of small synergy. But other than that, there's nothing really there to kind of help Gliscor. There's so much pressure on Gliscor to kind of pop off. I think I saw Donkey say that Suicune was really good for this team. It was. I think you should have tried to keep Suicune. I don't know if you traded it or if it came with contract. I think I remember there being a trade for Suicune or like a similar Pokemon. But I really do think that Gliscor is going to have a lot of pressure on this team, like as a defensive Pokemon, which sucks because I really think Gliscor is one of the best offensive Pokemon in draft. So it being forced into defensive options a lot, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on it, I think it's going to hurt this team a lot. So Carolina is such a cool team, except it's sort of like incomplete. It's a pretty good defensive core. It has a very good offensive core, but then the later options I thought were a little bit weak. So just find the team here so I can name them specifically. I think they're at the top. Here we go. So the defensive duo with Corviknight and Blissey, and then Blissey can use Wish to heal Regirock, and Croconaw I think is pretty good. Palafin with Galarian Zapdos and Raging Bolt is really, really good. I just think it needs a little more. I mean, Chinchino actually I think is like insane. So the offense I think is really, really, really fucking good on this team. The defense I think is really good as well. Cryogonal is actually good defensively. It's really, really good defensively, especially because now it can Terra out of that ice type and it can actually wall shit. It can actually wall stuff. So I think actually it might have been wrong. I think once again, this team might be better than its ranking, in saying that's 14. The problem with this team though was, it doesn't have the best hazards. So it has two good hazard setters though, with Regirock and Blissey. But they're the only hazards it does have. The momentum though is pretty good for this team. And when you have good momentum with Palafin and Zapdos, Galarian Zapdos, that's insane. You have Blissey with Corviknight, who can basically switch into everything. So when you have Palafin that wants to come in and swap out, you pretty much have a safe switch into anything. So this is a really, really strong team. I really, really like it. You started off really, really strong last season and then fell apart towards the end. But the thing is, Palafin has to go off this season. Okay, I can't say you have one of the best offensive cores if Palafin, I don't even think got a kill last season. So So Palafin actually has to step up and actually has to do well. If you were to move up, Palafin actually has to, perform like he's a top offensive threat. Because it's hard to say this is one of the best offensive cores if last season Palafin did nothing. So yeah, Palafin's got to step up. Atlanta, this is such a good team. If, just like last season, if Atlanta, and I love that they did it, by the way. I'm not saying this team should have done it because I think it's like one of the best things ever. But if Atlanta did draft real Pokemon instead of two Pokemon in the Chandelure line, this team would be a lot better. And saying that, it's still 13th. Saying it's twice in a row where this team is just kind of like throwing away 2 positions on their draft, and it's still insane. And I love them for that. Huge big dick move going for the getting the whole Chandelure line 2 seasons in a row. I love that for them. But overall, this team is just good. Like, the defense is good, the offense is good. Overall, like, there's not really anything bad to say about this team except that there's just 2 slots that could have been better. But like, it's whatever. Like, the team's still good. We'll see how Deontay goes without Terra this season. Hopefully, it still pop off. It popped off the last 2 seasons. Didn't really get the recognition it deserved. So we'll see what it does this season. So next is Cleveland. Okay, this team. I don't love this team. I think the coaching is really kind of carrying this one. The defense on this team doesn't really exist at all. There's so much pressure on Reuniclus to do everything. But that's kind of it. There's a lot of bulky Pokemon that can take hits like Ursaluna and Amoris T. Maybe a Scavalier, like physically, defensively. That's kind of it. And the offense doesn't impress me that much either. Now I'm looking at it, I think this team should probably be ranked a little lower. Probably around 16th, maybe 17th. Yeah, the defense is gonna struggle, and I don't think the offense is really that scary either. I think webs on this team would have been like insane though. So next is Philly, Tampa, Wild Chargers, Seattle, Jacksonville. Now, these teams, this is where it really shows that the difference between 6 and 28 is not that big. It's really not. The difference between 6 and 28 is not that big. I think there are maybe like a tier and a half difference between 6 and 28. But it's really like mostly the coaching that's pushing these teams ahead. So Indianapolis, I actually think probably have the best team amongst the teams that I just revealed. It's just that I don't know how consistent Petty is. Like, he kind of flies under the radar and then seems to just make playoffs pretty much every season he's been here. So he's obviously not bad, but I need to really see him step up and just dominate a regular season and not just try and scrape into playoffs. But he has a good team, I think he can do it. Jacksonville, I really fucking like Jacksonville. I really like Jacksonville. This is the weird problem I had. There are a lot of teams here that the coaches are all recognized as good and their teams are good, but they have bad seasons last year. So Jacksonville's one of them, and there are a few teams that are going to be revealed that are also fit that category. But I think Jacksonville's team, it's really fucking good. It's one of the best. It really is. There's just a lot of pressure on Masquerada and Gallade again, similar to last season, and they weren't able to follow through last season. But let me just see if I can get their team up real quick. The defense is so good though. The defense is awesome. I think I don't know how to pronounce this thing. I'm just gonna call it Garg. You know, the purifying salt, the salt cure, the rock guy who looks like the temple. He is so good. I really think he's like awesome. Webs with Glade is gonna be really fucking important. I think this team's strong. The defense with Palossand and Mantine, two very underrated defensive Pokemon. They both get recovery. I really like them. But the key to this team is Veluza. You have Glade and who I really like, and Masquerada. But you need more on offense. You can't just win with two good offensive Pokemon. Veluza with Webs has to go off this season. Veluza, if it wins low tier MVP, Jacksonville win the championship. You can quote me on that. And if I skipped over anyone, okay, Wild Chargers. So this was another team that I think I was actually quite low on this team, but I think the coach has just been consistent enough to kind of earn a low but top 10 spot. So the defense on this team is interesting. The Heatran, Overqwil, Dondozo, Garchomp can be defensively in some matchups. All the Pokemon I just named don't get recovery. Okay, I could be wrong with the Quillfish and Overqwil if they get Pain Split, but I don't think they do. I think it's just the regular one that does. None of them get recovery. The only thing that does is Amoonguss. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Amoonguss to kind of keep himself alive. But other than that, I'm also not too impressed by the offense either. I do like Garchomp and I do like Torn. Other than that, Specs Heatran is also pretty good. And there's enough bulky Pokemon where it should be free to do whatever it wants. Dondozo without Terra now isn't going to be as scary, but it's still pretty decent with the Curse Certs. But my favorite Pokemon, and the Pokemon that needs to pop off for this team to win, is Luxray. If Luxray, and I know it's good, I know Luxray is good. If Essed, with his mascot, can take Luxray to the low tier MVP, this team will pop off and will be really hard to beat. But it just all comes down to if these defensive Pokemon can kind of not die without their recovery. If they can kind of hold their own, they'll do very well. The next three teams, this is where it was tough. Especially the next two with San Francisco and Washington. These are coaches, again with Jacksonville, recognized as very good coaches, but had really unusually bad seasons. But I think that both their teams are really, really strong. However, they just got to show that last season was just like a little blip. They're going to be fine, they're still good, they're still elite. They just have to show me that they can pull it all together. Now, a coach and a team that I also believe is within all these, within the tier of all these teams in the top 10 is Las Vegas. But the reason they're in third is because the coach kind of really impressed me last season. I think this dude's awesome. He's so good. Go check out his YouTube, by the way. He's very, very experienced in draft. He's just good. Like, he's fucking good. He proved he was good. He got the low tier MVP. He almost won the. I know he did win the MVP. Sorry, he won the MVP with Minior. Minior popped off. The one game where it didn't pop off is because he got like a 6-0 with Terrapagos or whatever it's called, Terrapagos, whatever. I think this team's strong. This team's really strong. The coach is good, but I do think it's a B+ team, and that's just, there's 32 teams in the draft. And that's what I'm saying. That team number 3 is a B+ team. I think team 28 is maybe a C- team. Like, the difference between them is not that big. Like, it's really not that big. But team 2, I think, is in a tier of its own. Maybe A+ team. And I think team number 1 is the only S tier team in the league. And the team that I have in number 1 goes to Houston. Miami is number 2. So let's talk about Miami first, and then we'll go to Houston. So Miami, I think, is one of the only teams where the roster really seems complete and free to do whatever it wants. And I think it might be the only team that you can say this for, where every Pokemon is not pigeonholed into any role whatsoever, and they are free to do anything. So almost every Pokemon in this roster can come defensively as well as offensively, and it's going to be really difficult to prep for. There's not a lot of weaknesses on the team. However, the strength of the team is high. It is very high. But Houston is fucking good. Houston is so good. And the reason Houston is so good, there's a lot of pressure on Vaporeon to keep this defense like healthy and like thriving all game. But the reason this team is so good, most teams have maybe 2, maybe 3 immunities. This team has 17. This team has 17 fucking immunities. What the fuck? This team has 17 immunities, which is wild. It is insane. I think the defensive core is average on this team, but the fact that it has 17 immunities means I don't know how many turns in games this team is going to be having just free switch-ins, even though the defense, in my opinion, is just average defensive core. There's going to be so many just free switches they're going to get because they have immunities to everything. This team, I think, is really good. The speed is really good. The coach is really good. He's probably the most passionate coach in the league. He probably wants to be the best more than anyone. He probably tries the hardest. I really think this team is number 1. This team has been ranked number 1 quite a lot in its lifespan, but it has to really follow through. It really has to follow through, because if it does not make a deep run into playoffs this season, I don't know if I can keep giving it top spots throughout the seasons and in like preseason rankings and stuff like that. But I do think this team is really, really strong. Miami, back to Miami. So with this team, it's going to be very, very hard to prep for, and the reason I think this is in a tier of its own, above the teams in 3, there's just so many win conditions. Like every single Pokemon on this team, except actually no, every single Pokemon on this team is a win condition in some way, and I think this is going to make it very, very hard to prep for. It isn't insanely fast. It is fast. It is not insanely fast. However, it does have webs, which does kind of mitigate that weakness a little bit. I think the bulk is better than Houston's. I think the offensive threats aren't better immediately, but the win conditions are better than Houston's. But it's just the fact that Houston's team composition synergizes so perfectly together with all these immunities and their resistance, and like it is so hard to find holes on this team just looking at the weakness chart. I really think it's an S tier team. And even though the Pokemon, and even though I'm saying like I don't think the defensive core is better or the offensive core is better than Miami, this is an example of perfect team building. When you are very limited when you're limited in a 32 team league, Houston's team building and how they've just gotten Pokemon that all synergize together perfectly, I think makes it S tier team. And in prepping, it's going to be very hard to find holes and actually ways to beat this team. Similar to Miami, but I think it's just going to be on a different level that I don't think a lot of teams are going to be ready for. So there is that. And saying that, I did just count the immunities for Miami, and they have 12. So they're close. That close is a lot of immunities, but 17 is just ridiculous. So they're the rankings. Let me know what you think. Let me know how you feel about them. Like I said, the difference between like 3 and 28 is not that big. The difference between like 7, 6, 7 to 28 is like the same difference between 6 and 2. Like all these teams in here in the middle, like they can all win a championship. Philly, let's just go Philly. I just kind of skipped Philly. I skipped Philly. So Philadelphia, this is a team where I think it's hard to argue that they don't have the best coach. They won 2 championships. They're very inconsistent, but they're like the Joe Flacco. Connor is the Joe Flacco of the PSL. He's okay in the regular season, and then when he gets to playoff, he just hits that button and he just goes fucking off. And he's won 2 championships with 2 god tier playoff runs. 6-0ing me and Pop in the last 2 games was like in the playoffs was wild. It was insane. But I don't really like this team. I think the team's pretty scary when you look at like the first 6 Pokemon. Very good defensive core. The offensive Pokemon very threatening. However, they're very exploitable. But the fact that the best players in the league couldn't exploit those weaknesses because he played so perfectly around them, 6-0ing us, is kind of insane. It's kind of insane. But I do think this ranking at 11 is heavily carried by the fact that he is one of the best coaches in the league. And I think if it was coached by a lot of other coaches, I think this team would be around 24, 25-ish. Just a lot of holes and weaknesses on this team, but he has shown that he can play around them. But in saying that, it's still very difficult to do. And there are 32 teams in this league. There's going to be 14 teams in playoffs. It's so hard to win a championship in this league. So to do that again with a team with a lot of holes in the roster is going to be almost impossible. But he's done it twice, so why can't he do it 3 times? But that's why I have them at 11 and not at number 1, even though the coach has won 2 championships in a row. That's the rankings, almost an hour long. My throat is sore. I need to go have a shower, go eat, go to bed. I'm tired. But I'll see you all in the next video. Good luck.